Okay, great. Let's get started. Thank you all for joining us. We have an amazing group of presenters today that I'm excited to introduce you to. The first presenter is John Larmer. John is the Senior PBL Advisor for Defined Learning. He has been a thought leader and expert on project-based learning for over 20 years. He helped build the Buck Institute for Education, now known as PBL Works, where he served as editor-in-chief. He co-developed their model for gold standard PBL and contributed to the creation of the framework for high quality PBL. John is the author of several books on PBL and blog articles, including a series of articles on this topic that you can find on our blog at Defined Learning. Next, you'll hear from two amazing educators at San Ramon Valley Unified School District in California. First will be Dr. John Malloy. He is the superintendent, and he came to San Ramon in July 2020 after having served as the director of education at the Toronto district in Canada. He has an extensive background in education at all levels and is a fierce advocate for an equitable, accessible, quality public education. John prioritizes student voice. He spends time at schools, in classrooms, and with student leadership groups, ensuring that students have space to share their stories and insights, and that all of the district's work is guided by the experience and expertise of students, staff, parents, caregivers, and the wider community. And then joining John is Dr. Deborah Pettish, who is the Executive Director of Curriculum and Instruction. She began her career as a high school science teacher and later earned a PhD in Educational Studies from the University of Michigan. Dr. Debish is passionate about creating meaningful learning opportunities for students, and her work focuses on advancing curriculum and instruction in the district. So as you can see, we have some amazing presenters today, and without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to John Larmer.
Okay, thanks, Maggie, and welcome everyone. We're glad you're with us today in December, and we have a lot of good information to share with you. So let me share my screen and I will get started. Oh, Maggie, do you need to make me the presenter now? It says I can't share my screen with you sharing. Okay, here we go. All right. So let me just ask you to do a little thinking to yourself for a minute, and you don't need to enter the words in the chat because I have a hunch what's going to happen. Think about words or phrases people would use to describe an ideal graduate of the K-12 system. Just think for a few seconds. What word or phrase would you use to describe, or what would people you ask use to describe an ideal graduate? Okay. And I've seen that done in many places over the years, and recently it's become more popular. The words and phrases you thought of are the words and phrases that people all over the country, all kinds of schools and districts come up with to describe their ideal graduate or their portrait of a graduate, learner profile, profile of a graduate, lots of different terms for it. So this is just some examples from around the country, and you can see that the lists are pretty common. Creative, confident, communicator, critical thinker, problem solver, collaborator, all those kind of terms. And the lists are remarkably comparable, no matter who you ask. If you ask students, parents, teachers, business people, community members, people from higher education, the words tend to converge on a lot of common terms. Defined Learning has set up its own portrait of a graduate with these 8 competencies on it. Career readiness, academic knowledge and skills, kind of the what students are learning in terms of more traditional content, perhaps, and then citizenship, innovation, creativity, problem solving, critical thinking, communication, and collaboration. So establish this list just sort of to show that we are on the same wavelength. We don't mean for schools or districts to adopt this, but a lot of Define's work shows how our materials, our performance tasks and projects align with these kinds of competencies. There's a quick definition of a portrait of a graduate. It's the collective vision of the competencies and personal qualities students should possess. And the reason why is important. To be successful in the world beyond school, these days, it's not enough to just know stuff. I mean, the traditional content area knowledge is important. Students should still, of course, know some of that. But so much information is at our fingertips. It's knowing how to use the information, how to think critically and solve problems with it, how to work together and be creative and innovative, and have a more of a sort of a civic mindedness and a global consciousness, perhaps. That's what the students need these days, as well as the traditional content area knowledge. And that word collective is important too. Like I said, these portraits of a graduate are usually formed in a lengthy process. It can take several months, even a year, for a district to get input from various stakeholders, from the community and educators in its local area. They're called lots of things: portrait of a learner, learner profile, school-wide outcomes, kind of an older term, which I knew that way back in the 90s, actually, when I was a teacher. Habits of success, lifelong learning standards, and the graduate profile. So you see these go by many different names, but they usually have very similar lists of things on them. And John Malloy will share with you the San Ramon Valley District's learner profile. So the purpose of a portrait, then, it's got, I see, four general kinds of purposes. First of all, the 21st century workplace. Students need to know how to work in teams. It's a very project-based world. So learning project management skills, communicating with different audiences, being able to problem solve, think critically, take responsibility for doing your work and identifying problems and solving them, being aware of different cultures and global issues and local issues. Lots of different things in the 21st century workplace are needed beyond just technical and academic knowledge. In college, these kind of competencies are really helpful for students. So more and more colleges now are having students do things in teams, or having students make presentations to audiences, or create authentic products. All these things that are part of the 21st century workplace, you're seeing that show up more and more in colleges now too. To be a citizen these days, it's Lord knows we have a lot of issues that students need to think critically about in our society, and communicate with each other in respectful ways. That sort of civic mindedness, and practicing those democratic civic principles when you talk to others in your society. Very important these days in our nation, and just in life in general. These kind of competencies help navigate your life, where all kinds of problem solving and critical thinking and collaboration might be necessary. But the problem is, however, these portraits of a graduate that a lot of districts and schools create wind up being just a poster on the wall. They're in the back of a classroom, kind of gathering dust, and people look at them now and then and think, oh yeah, that's great stuff, but it doesn't go from poster to practice. And that's the key. It has to be put into action in the daily teaching and learning, the assessment systems, reporting systems that schools and districts have, to make that portrait really come to life. So it's not just a list of wonderful goals on the wall that somebody put up once and is soon forgotten, like a mission statement or a vision statement, perhaps. It's not really living and breathing in day-to-day work at a school. So I believe, as you might imagine, being a project-based learning guy, one of the best ways to move a portrait of a graduate from poster to practice is project-based learning. And this is an example of high-quality project-based learning. The HQ PBL framework has these 6 criteria for good project-based learning. A student would experience these 6 things when they're in a good project. That's the idea. You can find out more about this at hqpbl.org. But this gets at the idea that projects should be intellectually challenging. It's not a simple, superficial activity. It's in-depth and involves inquiry, high-quality work. Answering driving questions are essential questions, that depth of work and knowledge. Authenticity, it's very real world. The public product, students' work is displayed to an authentic public audience, not just the teacher and classmates. Collaboration, we put on this list because, like I said, the 21st century workplace really requires a lot of teamwork. Some projects can be done individually, but I think collaborative elements can be used even in individual projects, and most projects should be done in small teams. Project management skills, another one of those vital 21st century workplace skills. And how can you learn to manage projects without doing project-based learning? So I think that's an obvious connection there. And finally, reflection, sort of thinking about what you're learning, how you're learning, what kind of person you are, how you're growing, what you need to do. that's a really great skill to teach students, and that should be a part of every high quality project. So I see project-based learning as a high occupancy vehicle. You can put a lot into a project. A lot of different competencies can be taught. Content knowledge can be taught. Well, the research shows it does that very well, actually. Um, Students have opportunities to, to share agency and take responsibility in projects. So a lot can be packed in, and it'll get you where you want to go faster, I think, to use project-based learning as a key methodology to move from poster to practice. Someone in Fairfax County, Virginia, a few years ago, sent me this, where they talked about how project-based learning can be a delivery model for all the buzzwords, STEAM, portrait of a graduate, growth mindset, all those things. I like how the driver is content of this truck. So that sort of shows that academic content is still what students are, that's what they're learning when they're doing a project, along with all these other things. And notice it also talks about the delivery to all students. That's important. It is not just for some students. Project-based learning should be for all students. Now I would add deep learning to that list. Another thing that project-based learning goes hand in hand with deep learning, as you'll hear more from our panelists today. Deep learning, now that I mentioned it, is here's a definition I ran across from a teacher actually in Australia. The deep learning is a combination of the best of old and new. It's student-centered, inquiry is part of it, project-based, competencies focused, those graduate profile competencies, higher order, technically savvy. So that's a good definition, I thought. And this is based on some of the work from Michael Fullen, who has done a lot of great work on establishing guidelines for deep learning. And his organization, along with his colleagues, set these 6 C's of deep learning, which look obviously very familiar to us at this point, from very much like graduate profiles. So deep learning gets at a lot of the same things as graduate profiles and project-based learning. It's all kind of tied together, and as you'll hear from San Ramon Valley, it's really working for them. So I will turn it over to my California colleagues who are just across the bay from me, over in east of Oakland, over the hills in San Ramon Valley. And let's hear it from John Malloy.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. If you could
Okay.
stop sharing. Yep. Thank you.
All right.
This up.
Hi, John. John, I think you're muted.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Sorry, forgot to take, after all this time, still
All
forgetting.
this time, we still do it. Yeah.
So our tagline, as you see there in San Ramon Valley, is Success Reimagined. We really are thinking differently and deeply about our practice. And we are grateful for this opportunity to share with you today what we mean when we say Success Reimagined. So Debbie, next slide, please. So just a little bit about our district. We have about 30,000 students. Our kids pretty much come to school every day. We've got an excellent graduation rate, 35 sites, lots of good things going on. And we win a lot of awards, Blue Ribbon Awards, California Distinguished School Awards. So you might ask, why change anything when it would appear that so much of what goes on here is great? And we're very, very grateful for the rich and effective teaching environments and learning environments we provide for our kids, but we knew that so much more is needed. Next slide, Debbie. So you can see again that we were just designated a National Lighthouse District by the American Association of School Administrators. But we were designated that actually on the new work that we are doing. And I want to be very clear that the work that we're doing in terms of deep learning is newer to us. It doesn't mean it hasn't happened in pockets throughout our district, but it is clearly now a strategic direction of our system. Next slide. I'd like us to spend just a moment thinking about our vision. We're broadening the definition of success on the foundation of academic excellence so all students may thrive. We have had academic excellence here as it is defined and how it is measured. I'm grateful that we have that data, and I'm wondering how, as systems, we can measure what it is that we want our students to be able to do, know, and understand, aligned with what John was speaking about related to our learner profile, which I'll speak to in a minute. But we want academic excellence. That's not going away. This is not an either or, which I sometimes hear when we speak about deep learning. Does that mean you don't care about reading? Does that mean you don't care about math? We do. But we're broadening the definition of success because sometimes in the way in which we invite kids to learning, it can be very traditional. The status quo can be alive and well. And what we all know is those learning models don't work for all students, and it is our job to meet each and every one of them. But I also want to focus on the word thrive. We learned during the pandemic in the San Ramon Valley Unified School District, and I'm guessing in many districts across this country and beyond, that when our students did not have their teacher right in front of them all the time directing the learning, some of our kids found that difficult. Some of our families felt that accountability was missing, and some of our teachers required additional support because we had not fully embraced the problem-based learning, the deep learning that would allow that thriving to happen. Further, we do want for our students to be confident, independent, purposeful. We want them to take ownership. We want them to have voice. And too often in that traditional setting, where sometimes the teacher may be directing everything that's happening, students may be listening passively, we don't get to that place where the engagement is at such a level where the students are truly learning in deep ways. Next slide, please. When I was trying to begin with our team to think differently about our practice while we were doing so in the face of a context that was really pretty good, this particular invitation is what I believe drew the most attention. Of course, we want our students to be great students and happy, healthy human beings who will change the world. John mentioned Michael Fullen earlier, and I'm grateful to share that because I was in Toronto for a very long time, Michael has been a mentor to me, and I was a part of the New Pedagogies for Deep Learning movement when it started over 10 years ago. And yet, if we think about all that we've been saying for decades, this is year 38 for me, about problem-based learning, differentiation, personalized learning, etc. I think we all need to realize that our worlds haven't always changed that much when we think about what school looked like when we were there. And maybe that was okay a while ago, but I'm trusting that I do not need to share with the group that's on this webinar that our world is changing so rapidly. The tools our students have access to, like artificial intelligence, is transforming how we think about learning. And if we're not doing things differently, our kids will not thrive and will not be able to contribute to our world. But what I also appreciate putting on the table is all of those tools do not take away the power of the human being, our ability to think and create, to be compassionate and empathetic, our ability to command the attention of the room and persuade people into thinking differently about different facts and ideas, to analyze all the information that's out there, to determine where truth lies. That's what we are driving towards in San Ramon Valley Unified School District. Next slide, Debbie. I won't go into all the detail here, but I wanted to share this image with you that this is the graphic of our strategic directions. And I'm going to draw your attention to our priority, which is deep learning, innovation, and academic excellence. Our commitment to equity speaks to the access our students need to the learning opportunities that will help them excel in environments that is free from all discrimination, in environments that are free from all hate and any bias that gets in the way. Further, we are committed to social emotional well-being, realizing that if our kids are not well, they are not able to learn. And those three components at the top of our pyramid speak to that which works in tandem with one another. Let's talk about deep learning. Let's talk about problem-based learning. When kids are truly part of an effective team, we have the evidence. It makes them feel really good about themselves. When kids have a place where their voice matters, that access we talk about, that equity is there. When we as educators create opportunities for kids to go so much further than we could ever imagine by creating the conditions for that. That is what deep learning is based on. And I'm guessing everyone here has had experiences where you open the doors to our students' creativity and thinking. They can take things so much further than anything that we might have been able to create on our own as an individual educator. Next slide, please. This is our learner profile. This is the one that John spoke about earlier that districts have all across the country. And we are doing our very best to ensure that it is not a poster on the wall or it is not information on a shelf. And that's why we are really grateful for our partnership with Defined Learning, because we know that when our educators have the opportunity to deeply understand what we're talking about, then they have that much more opportunity to implement. And Debbie's going to speak about that in a minute. But simply put, we want our kids to be critical thinkers. We want them to be creative contributors. We want them to be intentional collaborators. We want them to be effective communicators. And the last but not least, we want them to be adaptable learners. And I'm going to hold for a moment because this particular slide says it all. We do believe that our kids need empathy and compassion. We do understand that the rapidly changing world demands so much from our students. We know that we can't even predict what tomorrow's going to look like. And yet, if our educational processes continue to be more static, more teacher-driven, more content-based, and I'm not against content, but we all know from every body of research that content alone, especially when we have access to so much content at our fingertips, is not going to be okay for our students. Which is why how we are putting deep learning into place, how we're supporting our educators to make this happen, how we're placing our students at the center is what brings our learner profile to life. Over to Debbie.
All right, thank you so much, John. That is a perfect segue into kind of the what and the how in terms of our strategic directions, our learner profile, and putting them into practice. So John mentioned our 6 strategic directions, of which, of course, our highest priority is deep learning and innovation. And those were approved by our Board of Education in June of 2021. And so, of course, we thought very deeply about in 21-22, how are we going to promote our community's understanding of deep learning and innovation and what it entailed. And when I say community, of course, I mean our staff, our students, our parents, our caregivers, our administrators. Part of the challenge there, and why I titled the slide Uncharted Territory, was because, of course, 21-22 was really the first year after COVID that everybody was going to be back at school. And there was just so many question marks with regard to how students would be coming back academically, from a social emotional standpoint. There was still a lot of masking and distancing and COVID tracing that our administrators and staff needed to navigate. And so an additional challenge was, as Dr. Malloy pointed out, we're an already high achieving district. Individuals move to this area to send their students to our schools. So we felt this first year, we really needed to build an understanding of the why, again, across our parent community, students, and especially our staff, because they have been getting accolades, rightfully so, for many years for all of those things that you saw on that earlier slide, our high graduation rates, the percentage of our students who get into very high quality colleges and universities. So one of the things that we did over the course of this year to build their understanding of the why was really try to reinforce and support a kind of a larger understanding of what the workforce as of now really entails and how that's going to really change very rapidly over time. Because one of the things that we talk about internally, and I'll use myself as an example, I've been in education since I was 22 years old, right? And so sometimes I don't even know all the plethora of opportunities that are out there for our students. And so we really felt it was important to really get a better understanding from our industry partners, from our parent community, of what employers were really looking for in their employees, and to highlight this to our staff in particular. And I don't want to dismiss what John said earlier about social emotional well-being. We really feel that deep learning and innovation is intricately tied to social emotional well-being. So if we are able to create experiences that are truly exemplify deep learning, students are collaborating, they have voice and choice in terms of what they're learning, how they're demonstrating their learning, etc., that is going to support their social emotional well-being and will further deepen their understanding of the content at hand. So that was another thing that we really wanted to focus on with regard to the why, because we did have a lot of questions about why would we change our approach. And so we really wanted to hone in on that. At the same time, that was not the only thing that we wanted to do. We knew that we needed to build leadership capacity across the system in order to really learn what will work, what won't work, but especially to hold up the great work that maybe fewer individuals or a handful of sites would be able to dig into. So we had some principals volunteer to be in what we called the deep learning and innovation cohorts. I think our first year we maybe had 6 or 7. And these were principals, of course, that maybe had been there longer. They knew they had a staff that was kind of ready for it, even post-COVID. And this was extremely valuable because we really supported them in understanding at a deeper level what deep learning and innovation was all about. We applied them with resources for collaboration time. We provided them access to the Defined Learning platform, which was extremely helpful, so that over time, they could kind of be the, for lack of a better term, role models to their administrator colleagues, teacher colleagues, and that we could show that this really works in our district. Because, you know, sometimes we get questions about, can kindergartners really do deep learning? Well, yes, look at what is happening over here in this cohort school. Well, what about seniors, you know, in an AP class? Is that really possible? Absolutely. Look at what this teacher has done in this AP class at this high school. So the understanding the why, building leadership capacity was extremely important for that first year. Then we felt our next step was really to then, once things started to calm down a little bit, was really to build foundational understandings. So that we all had that strong foundation of what deep learning and innovation really meant. And so John Larmer earlier talked about the 6 C's of deep learning and innovation. And so we really hammered home on, collaboration, creativity, critical thinking. Again, the things that would eventually kind of morph into our learner profile competencies. Of course, part of the professional development in these first couple of years was really focused on instructional design. So we felt, especially at the elementary level and to a slightly lesser extent at the middle school level, teachers were very accustomed to having a very specific curriculum or a box that they would use in order to support them in teaching in a certain way. And we weren't necessarily doing that. We wanted to teach them pedagogy and how to design a lesson, a unit, an assessment that really fit with what we felt was important with regard to deep learning and innovation. And of course, we have 1,700 certificated staff, so we're a fairly large district. Of course, some of them caught on quickly, had the time, the energy, the motivation, the enthusiasm to kind of figure it out. Whereas others were a little bit slower in terms of, it's really hard at first to wrap your head around what deep learning and innovation looks like. So you can talk about instructional design, but if a teacher has never experienced it in their K-12 or in their college university experience, they've been teaching 5, 10, 15 years and they've not been implementing it or seeing it around them, it's really hard to not only design, but even just visualize the possibilities, the potential of what it could be. And so, and again, during this time, we further brought in panels of employers in our area. We're about halfway between San Francisco and Silicon Valley. And that was really, really powerful, again, to open our minds up to say, okay, what I'm teaching is valuable, but the kids need other types of skills if they are going to really be able to get the jobs, get into the colleges and universities, obtain the jobs that they really want to obtain in our area. That was important to our teachers too, because a lot of our teachers are like me and have only been in education since they were probably 22, 23 years old. So really opening up everybody's eyes about how things have changed, the plethora of job opportunities, what employers are looking for in different types of knowledge and skills was really, really valuable. But again, going back to the challenge, this instructional design challenge, and we had to adapt to it because what we were also seeing was that some teachers were viewing deep learning and innovation as almost like an add-on activity. And when I would go on my observations across our 35 sites, I would hear, oh, I love deep learning and innovation. I finished this unit early and I was able to spend 1 or 2 days doing this really neat activity. And they weren't seeing the connection between our newly formed essential standards that we spent 2 years building and deep learning and innovation pedagogy. They almost felt that they had to provide the content to the students, then they could do something really fun, engaging, collaborative after. And we felt that that was a pretty big issue that needed to be addressed. And then understandably, teachers, everyone on this call knows how extremely busy teachers are. It's not only difficult to understand how to engage in instructional design for these experiences, but it's time consuming as well. So that's when we really turned to Defined Learning, who has been a great, really honestly, like a great thought partner I love that I could sit down with individuals like Sarah Scott and really kind of brainstorm, this is what we're experiencing, this is what we're seeing. And then her and her team of individuals we would just kind of brainstorm and try to problem solve together as opposed to any one person having the answers. And what we quickly learned was like the Define Learning platform and the resources they have on there is the epitome of how we were defining deep learning and innovation. It was engaging, it encompassed the 6 C's, the critical thinking, the collaboration, the creativity. It also did an amazing job of having students apply what they're learning in order to solve a novel problem and task. So, but we didn't want to just, again, hand teachers that box or that curriculum and have them use it wholesale. It's another thing that we appreciated about Define Learning, which was this idea that they're encouraged to work with their colleagues to really modify the tasks, the resources in order to fit their individual circumstance. And that was really, really wonderful because we also, through Define Learning, wanted to support teachers in understanding instructional design. So it's kind of that iterative process where I'm going to use this, I may slightly modify it to fit my context. Through that, I'm going to learn how to support my instructional design qualities, competencies, for lack of a better term. And then I can in turn really go back and design an experience for my students with or without Define Learning there to help me. So it was kind of like a crutch, a scaffold at first that I think we can continue to use over time, which has been extremely valuable. Something else is it really enhanced collaboration. I think one of my favorite examples was at one of our elementary schools, there's a performance task that asks students to design a candy store. And so there was a kindergarten, first grade, and second grade teachers. So there was that vertical collaboration where they all took a component of that task and they took it on. And so maybe the kindergartners were designing the pieces of candy, the first graders were applying the mathematics skills to decide how much that candy would cost, and so on and so forth. The teacher brought in a local owner of a candy store, so there's that college and career connection there that's already built in, but that the teacher got excited about and was able to supplement. So what we see is that teachers aren't using this in isolation. One of our big pushes this year was enhanced collaboration through PLCs, and I just feel like the Define Learning platform really serves to further support that goal. And then it ended up really, even though when we first started using Define Learning, we did not have our learner profile competencies defined, it really served to highlight and exemplify what we might want those competencies to be. So what do I really mean by that? And I put together this super simple diagram. But with the top being, Dr. Malloy, we were all very doubtful where in the spring of 2021, when he said, let's create a set of strategic directions in the midst of really some craziness that we hadn't experienced before in our educational careers. It turned out to be absolutely the best idea, because we then had a vision, a unified TK through 12 vision of what we wanted teaching and learning to look like in classrooms. So that in turn brought us to defined learning, which really supported us in implementing deep learning and innovation. But what it also did was help us really hone in on what are those competencies that we want every student to be able to achieve by the time they graduate. And then to further that, then coming back to Define Learning, teachers can use that platform, those resources, as a way to nurture those competencies in students, which again goes back to our deep learning and innovation goals and strategic direction. So it was really kind of this, for lack of a better term, iterative process that helped us really hone in on what was most important to us, and also provided teachers with the support and the scaffolding that they needed to implement these in the classroom. And so then eventually we, after 2 years of that cohort model, now all of our K-8 teachers have access to defined learning, and we have done professional development with all of them on how to use it. And we have also asked our principals to develop kind of what we're calling soft goals. So to, how are you going to use defined learning at your site over the next year? What does that collaboration look like? What supports do you need, et cetera? And then finally, next steps. So I'm moving from poster to practice. So I feel like we're on our way, but there's still, of course, a lot of work to be done. So an opportunity we had was to change our elementary report card to reflect our learner profile competencies. So there's actually a component of our report card that where teachers will assess a student's ability to think critically, to be adaptable learners, to communicate effectively. And we think that, what we assess really represents to our students, to our staff, to our community, especially what we value. So I think that putting those explicitly on the report card is really sending a message that we think is really valuable and important. Now, how do we assess those competencies? Because that's not easy, right? And that's our next kind of foray into our learner profile and building on that work. So the next step is really to work alongside defined learning, to develop rubrics that are embedded in their activities to assess these competencies. So you can imagine if a teacher's going to do a defined learning task at the beginning of the year and at the end of the year, they're going to use one rubric that is directly correlated to our learner profile competencies. They're going to assess that competency, or maybe 2 or 3, critical thinking, effective communication, through that performance task at the beginning of the year, use the same rubric towards the end of the year so we can see the extent to which progress is made. It's all kind of in one spot. So at the district level, we can also measure growth in the various areas so we can better target a professional development for the future. And then tonight at our board meeting, we are so excited to be rolling out a college and career readiness. We've been calling it a plan, but it's really a framework that is the umbrella under which everything we do. So we're focused on the 4 E's: enhance, explore, experience, and enlighten. So for example, at the elementary level, with enhancing and exploring, with the littles, how are we introducing them to even what is a career, right? How do you, when a TK student works in a kitchen, how can you easily connect what a career is there, and what really simple skills like working together, collaborating, may be involved in that career? Experience at the middle school level. How are we providing students with more experiences? We hear from our students that they have very few conversations about their passions, their interests, and their strengths, and how that could lead to really more effective decision making with regard to career choice, choosing a major in college. They just don't have the experience. So it's what their parents might want them to do, or the handful of careers that maybe exist in their family. So how are we really allowing them to explore careers so that by the time they get to high school and they have some more experiences with careers, they're really more enlightened, have a better understanding of what they may want to pursue? And that's a great tie into defined careers that really does, if not everything, most of the things that I just said in terms of supporting students in that exploration and getting some virtual experience into their careers. So that is all I have. I think I'm going to stop sharing. Feel free. I think it's a Q&A for the next few minutes, but please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. I would be more than happy to chat with you, connect you with members of my team who have been working feverishly to get these things off of the ground.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We do have one question that came in for San Ramon. Was the professional development around the 6 C's and instructional design provided to teachers required or optional, and how was it delivered?
Yeah, so that's a really great question because the culture in our district has really been an opt-in culture. And we felt that we needed to have some professional development that again served as a foundation. The idea of strategic directions, the idea of deep learning and innovation was pretty new. And so we felt that we needed to provide professional development to all staff in order to develop those foundational understandings of the 6 C's so that they would essentially understand what we were expecting of them over time. Then we can get more, because we don't like the one size fits all. And so there was some differentiation, but we did feel that the foundational understanding at first and then differentiating over time in order to support the new teacher who's been there 20 years, the kindergarten teacher, the AP teacher, et cetera.
And an additional thought that I want to add to what Debbie just said. The reason why I think it was important for us to expose all of our teachers to this way of thinking is because we also wanted to honor many things that were happening in our classrooms that were excellent. Sometimes when we're trying to think differently about instruction, instructional design, et cetera, we might inadvertently communicate in a way that makes our educators who work really hard, time is finite, they want to do the best job possible, feel as though they are actually not doing well. And so by bringing everyone together, this is what we've been sharing. And I visit schools every single week and I talk like this. Don't make deep learning a thing. Let's look at what you've already designed in terms of instruction. Where is a student's voice and choice in that? How is the learning task maybe over days with some complexity and depth? How are you actually building in intentional opportunities for kids to work together and communicate their learning to each other? My point is, we sometimes have to take some of the myths out of these expectations so that our teachers don't think they've got another 10 things to do in a finite amount of time and in a way that makes them feel as if they aren't the professionals that we believe they are. So that's another valid reason, I think, to bring people together to think about where it is that the district's going and what it is that we need from them and how it is that their expertise can also inform the district's direction on how we approach the work.
Okay. John, I saw a question from a participant I'd like to relay to you and Debbie. The question is, how does your work with other providers like Inflection complement the work with defined learning? What other providers have you engaged for different pieces of the foundational work?
So I'll start, Debbie, and then you can jump in. I shared earlier that due to my own Toronto connection, Michael Fullen and the team at New Pedagogies for Deep Learning have been a part of our work since the beginning. That I think was the major partner that continues to be the partner that allows us to create the deep learning pilots. We then have learned from other partners like Battelle for Kids, who assisted us with our learner profile to think deeply about that. Other partners have worked with us at different times in the journey. And then, of course, Defined Learning is a big partner with us. But our starting point is very specific. And I share this with any provider who works with us. We want to make anything we do grounded in San Ramon culture. Our strategic directions approved by the board, that's our North Star. Our learner profile is how we're defining a student is thriving when they are able to do the things that are on our profile. That's also approved by our board. And we don't ever want to communicate to our educators that they will not be effective unless they have this resource, that product, or that process. Our goal is that they own it. And that any business partner, any professional partner that we work with helps our local ownership of the work we're committed to do. So that's how we work with the partners that we're presently with, and any partner we might choose to engage in the future, that would be the same expectation that we would work with.
Do you mind if I add to that, John? Because, you know, one of the things that John taught me when he came here was the importance of coherence. And the importance of when we work with our different partners, and again, they really are thought partners and helping us think through. Nobody has all the answers, right? But that we also align terminology, because staff has a million things going on at any one time. We don't have a lot of access to our 1,700 certificated members for something like this. So we really, really, really would talk a lot about them, about aligning our terminology. So yes, you may use this term, we use this term. It's essentially the same thing. Can we please get on the same page? If not, it would start to get really, feel really disjointed for our staff members.
And I think, Debbie, you outlining coherence is so important, because how many times do our educators say, you're overwhelming us? There's too many things. Well, let's reframe this, because maybe we're only trying to do 2 things, but the way in which we're talking about it makes it sound like 15. So we have really focused in on your instructional design is the foundational piece. How students are at the center of that design is the absolute most important piece, and how we support you to be a lot of different things. Sometimes you're directing instruction, sometimes you're modeling, sometimes you're observing, sometimes you're facilitating, etc. Like, that's where we're really spending all of our energies in terms of how we're approaching the professional learning that we're providing when there's really finite amounts of time.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that was all the questions in the chat. I just want to say thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us, and for, most importantly, for the important work that you do, the trailblazing work you do to provide students with the opportunity, all deeper learning opportunities, so that all students can thrive. So thank you, and for the support you give your teachers to do this important work. So thank you very much for that. And I believe, John, did you want to share? You had a few more, I believe you said you had a few more things you wanted to share, correct?
Yes, thank you, Maggie. Yeah, I just, Debbie, you mentioned your work with Defined, and it's leading toward some important work in terms of assessment of portrait of a graduate competencies, learner profile competencies. And Defined is developing a new service module called Defined Goals, which will help with that. So Debbie, you mentioned this. It's a way to both assess and then report student achievement of portrait of a graduate competencies. So Defined Goals involves working with school districts to sort of, set plans for their goals. How are you going to assess these in terms of different projects and performance tasks? Defined can work with districts to add lines and rows and rubrics for various competencies, critical thinking, collaboration, what have you, and then collect the data and assemble it and display it for schools and to use in assessing student achievement. So Defined Goals is a wonderful new thing to explore, and you can, if you go to Defined's website, you'll find information there. That QR code will get you to it, and we'd love to work with schools and districts to because that piece of that assessment piece is one of the trickiest parts. I mean, it's fine to say poster to practice, but when it really comes down to how are you measuring these, that's where it gets tricky, and a lot of school districts don't quite go there. They might have a big rubric for critical thinking, what have you, but this Defined Goals piece really sort of nailed it down to collecting data. So the 4 components there The goal plans is where you would actually select competent projects that measure certain competencies. The catalogs emphasizes rubrics for measurement and so forth. So from PD for teachers involved as a third component, and finally collecting the data and analyzing it to showcase the evidence and providing a dashboard to school districts. So that's sort of the defined goals plan, and we're developing those as we speak with school and district partners. So I'd encourage you to follow that QR code and learn more about it as you wish. And so that's about all I had to say. I always have tons of questions to ask about the nuts and bolts of things, but John and Debbie, I think you've given us a great picture of what your district is doing, and I wish you well with your work, and I know it's going to benefit your students. So carry on. Good stuff.
Thanks.
All right. Maggie, you want to say any final goodbyes?
Yes, yeah, I tried to pull up my, my last little slide there. Is that working for you? Can you see that?
Not yet.
I know, this happened last time, didn't it? Actually, sorry. All right, well, anyways, sorry, I was trying to share my screen with you all, and I'm having a hard time right now. One more time, I'm going to give it one more time.
We'll all figure out Zoom one of these days, right?
No, right. All right, there we go. Now can
Here
you
we
see?
go. Yep.
All right, and I'll put the whole thing up there for you. Perfect. Yes, I just wanted to piggyback on that and let you know if you did want a virtual demo of defined goals that John has just mentioned about. We have one on January 24th at 2 p.m., a live demo of that. And if you click on this QR code, it can take you to the registration page. But other than that, I just want to thank everyone for joining us. We will be sending a recording of this video and an email to everyone, all of the registrants, in the next 24 hours. And it will also be available on our website in our resources page. And I encourage you to check out that resources page. We have other amazing webinars on similar topics. And we also have white papers and all of that good stuff. So thank you very much. And thank you all for joining us. Have a great day.